I'm Dane Rose, and we come now to one of the most difficult to articulate but important awarenesses that I've come to in my own relationship with both chronic trauma, starting in early childhood, but also the most recent wave of trauma, which was actually initiated with my therapist. And I'm going to do a diagram to try and put this into images and words. So we have an individual ego. And very much like a phone, an individual ego in their energy field, in their consciousness, in their emotional self, let's say it's rated at 4.5 volts. Now, the brain is actually astounding in how little energy it requires and its ability to generate energy, but let's say it's 4.5 volts, the equivalent of many phones. And the issue comes when we're dealing with transference of emotion, transference of constellations or complexes in Jungian terms, when a whole group of people linked together in a one-way transference of 80 volts. 80 volts. Now, this is going to fry the phone. And there's, as an aside, a wonderful episode in Star Trek Next Generation about exocomps and the beginning of a new life form. But one of the ways that they measured intelligence was that the circuitry, the robot, etc., the new life form, the exocomp, refused to knowingly obey a suicidal task. You know, when we think as human beings that we're very important, and so if a cell phone will save our life, sure, have the cell phone. If it's a question of burning alive or getting the iPad, let it go. I'm not going to burn, that kind of thing. But the exocomps refused to interface in a way that would lead to their destruction. Now, human beings have a very sophisticated survival network that's helped them keep alive for billions of years. And when these high voltage emotional currents are flowing towards an individual, it overloads the system of the conscious emotional self. The conscious emotional self gets flooded. There is a reservoir within the psyche, and at 1.2 volts it's about here, and then at 2 volts, and then 3 volts, and then 4.5 volts it's maxed out, and then it's got a little bit of extra reserve where it starts to get very uncomfortable. And then as with some of our most sophisticated gadgetry, it blows a fuse. Rather than destroy the entire phone, it blows a fuse. It trips a breaker and says, we are not going to destroy a 5 billion-year-old piece of equipment and all of its genetics, etc., that's taken 40 years to be manufactured and grow to the present point, just because a group of people do not have the intelligence to regulate the emotional current coming towards the individual, or just because the parent does not have the intelligence to understand the equation of mass. And I can see I may have to lift this up slightly. Okay, that's a little better. So a group can simultaneously bombard an individual. This is why media, as one example, is so unhealthy for the individual. When someone gets hazed in social media, and it's not good because it's concentrating all the energy of hundreds or thousands of people towards one person. It needs to be grounded and held by a group of people, by a container capable of holding the charge. It needs to have, in this case, be intercepted with a battery that can take in the 80 volts and do something good with it, and then very slowly trickle the 4.5 volts back out in a constructive way. If we look at emotions and energy like electricity, and because reality tends to be holographic in a lot of areas, it's a good place to start with the areas that we've studied. So in a materialistic culture, the study of human emotions is almost non-existent. The amount of hours you and I spent in high school learning about a single emotion, learning about emotional intensity of a single emotion, learning about frequencies and the ecological nature of an emotion with its environment. Zip, 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 not even a single hour. However, electrical engineers in our culture do spend, cumulatively millions and millions of hours studying the principles of conductivity and flow and storage, etc. in electricity, and that's going up again most recently with Tesla. So it's good to borrow from the metaphorical library of the technologies that we've studied in depth, until we have a culture that honors the fact that we have a heart, each one of us, that is a scientific emotional instrument, meaning every thought and every sensation in our body is represented in the heart with a felt experience. So it's a profound instrument that can be used to play the most beautiful of love songs, or the most horrific of lonely and hate songs. The sounds are neutral, but they reflect ecologically the environment around the instrument, the environment mentally, the environment biologically, which can include memories, but also the actual social and physical environment around the body that houses this instrument, the heart. Now, when this doesn't happen, there is a mechanism between the body, which is overloading, and our ego that blows a fuse. So the wires are coming here, rapidly fills up to 4.5 volts, goes up 6, 7, 8, up, we've got danger, wires are cut. Now this is called dissociation. Now what it means is that you may in some cases fry the battery. You may fry the battery. You can do permanent damage to the body. But what it means is that the conscious mind that we use to navigate and keep ourselves safe and make decisions will no longer be aware of the full 80 volts coming into the body. And this dissociation of an area of voltage out here creates a partition part of the self that has 80 volts in it. And this is too big to integrate. 80 volts cannot come back into the system. And so what good therapy healing protocol does with these dissociated parts is a process of circling, witnessing, and bite-sized pieces or layers where first of all you ground to protect yourself. Second of all, you begin exploring the terrain mentally. Oh yeah, do you remember that memory when this and that happened? You completely lost consciousness and freaked out and went into massive shame. Shame, by the way, is a symptom of exclusion. There's many ways to exclude someone. One is to violate their boundaries. You're excluding them because they are the boundary, meaning when you violate someone's capacity to digest something, you dissociate with them because they're forced to leave for you to show up. An example of that is going too fast for someone sexually because, well, it's a comfortable speed for you. If it's too fast for them emotionally to want to participate, they will dissociate. If it's too fast for their body, they will tighten. And if you force through, there is a dissociation mentally and emotionally, meaning they actually feel less close to you mentally and emotionally in order to partition and separate the body in a move that is basically, okay, you're going to dominate my body, you're not listening to me. Okay, I don't want to be in my body, so you do that to my body, and I won't come around you as much because I'd like to have all of me be present, my thoughts, my feelings, and my body. And so this is one form of exclusion. Your pace is excluded because my pace is going to assert itself. Your preferences are excluded so that my preferences can dominate. Your needs are excluded because my needs need to dominate and are more important, of course. And so we have this very important area of inclusion or exclusion. Now, when multiple people, a crowd starts hurling stones and stoning someone to death, as in a scapegoating ritual or a lynching, it produces a feeling of shame. And the shame is that I'm hearing the message from 10, 24, 3, 100 people that your needs don't matter. You don't matter. Your boundaries don't matter. What's important to you does not matter. What matters is what we want to do. We want to gang rape you. We want to stone you. We want to humiliate you. We want to bully you. Whatever it is, we want to shout racial slurs and this and that and the other. So there's a shaming because this overloads the fragility of the individual without protection. Now, this so this is a profound vulnerability for the individual, because when you've got numbers around you, each one can throw a single volt at you, 1 volt, or everyone can throw 4 volts of energy at you. But in a cumulative impact, it becomes multiplied into an amount, a volume of energy that is too big to cope. Now, this is the dissociation point. Now, it's also the trauma point. The trauma point is when we feel threatened. Now, because we're pack animals, because you and I, some hundreds of thousands of years ago were monkeys, we don't feel safe biologically when we are excluded and shamed. And by and large, herds do not exclude and shame their members. They don't have the feeling of the human heart. They're not conscious in the way that we are. But by and large, they do not exclude members of the tribe. Now, what I want to talk about is what happens when a dissociated part forms in energy. And there is always some pathway, some link, and freezes in place, first of all. Now, this is an important thing to understand, that this dissociation happens biologically. And one way to look at it is the way water crystallizes into ice. That we're constantly creating heat. We're constantly creating heat in a typically cooler environment. And if we get cold water generated and sent to us, we will warm it up. We'll eat a bottle of ice water, we'll heat it up. We'll drink another bottle of ice water, we'll heat it up. But at some point, rather than heating up the frozen water that's coming towards us, we get frozen by the intensity of the water we're consuming. For example, rather than drinking a glass of ice water, our naked body is floating in ice water. There can be a matter of 15 minutes before we develop hypothermia and just dissociate permanently from our body. What I want to talk about is this freeze point, where at 32 degrees, the flow of emotion becomes the ice cube that is frozen in state. Now, whatever is going on emotionally at that point stays there. We find animals and mummies and things in Antarctica as ice glaciers melt, and they're perfectly preserved, thousands and thousands of years old, or 50 years old. It doesn't matter. They're frozen in at the state when the freeze occurred, and they do not thaw until there is a temperature that is capable of warming the ice. If we can understand dissociation as a form of freezing of our emotional state at the moment when the overwhelm occurs, at the moment when the trauma occurs, because we are pack animals, the trauma, when we dissociate from if we look at the brain, we have this higher kind of spiritual human being, then we have the human being, we have the human animal, we have the mammalian brain, and we have below that we have the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain can cope with any instinctual environmental threat of a predatory nature. So what triggers the reptilian brain is a sociopathic environment, much like the environment we lived in as reptiles, where whichever was the fastest crocodile ate the other crocodiles, etc., etc. So this is our reptilian heritage, the ancient brain stem of fight, flight, and freeze, which are just instincts. What is the best survival path? Is it to run? Is it to play dead? Or is it to fight like hell and beat the other guy? And in a sociopathic environment, it's very much, for example, the rock, paper, scissors, that's a sociopathic environment because someone's going to win and the other one's dead. So what do? Rock, paper, scissors. If you luck out in your instinct, and it is just, it's a perfect metaphor for the trauma protocol. You've got to pick. The ancient instinctual brain in every moment has to pick. Rock, paper, scissors. Fight, flight, freeze. Play dead, do nothing, hope the threat goes away, hope that I don't get singled out as the person that has all the attention on them, and maybe I'll be alive after the fighting is over. Maybe they'll take me for dead. Works sometimes, doesn't work sometimes. Hey, we got a live one here. There's a pulse, stab. There's laying on the battlefield. Now, you also have, run. If you can't outrun the threat, you're dead. Your body kicks in, run. And you can't outrun this one because the rent is due and running didn't generate any more money. So yes, you avoided this, and yes, you didn't call this back, and yes, you didn't look at your bank account again, and yes, but the amount due just kept rising and didn't go away. You couldn't outrun it by not answering calls and doing this, that. Or the fight, it's 1 against 5. You fought and you lost. Now you're back to the new strategy. Is it fight or flight? Now, research suggests that all of us have a trauma management strategy. When we feel that some part of our identity, our being, is under threat. Now this is the way this mingles biologically with our modern world is a little bit frightening and a little bit puzzling. Because, for example, you will have men go into fight, flight, and freeze around erectile dysfunction or a limp penis. You will have women go into fight, flight, and freeze around not being called back for a date when they're interested. You will have people go into fight, flight, freeze when people are gossiping about them in a humiliating way, when something humiliating has come out and come into light, and there's a sense that, you know, the whole room knows about it and is pointing, and that's, you know, that's the person who wife left him, and that's there's this sense of fight, flight, freeze, and it comes in when it doesn't look like there's going to be enough money in the bank. It comes in when the person we really need and want to like us is showing ambivalence. It comes in when the partner that we're attached to and love is using an avoidant strategy. When you're using a pursue strategy and they're using an avoid strategy to create safety, they feel safer in the sense of independence. You feel safer in the sense of strong, secure attachment. Just as an aside, the strong, secure attachment has been what's worked most as pack species, and which aligns with the data. The biology of the body is stronger, the health of the body is stronger, the stress is lower in secure, attached, trusting, and trustworthy relationships. Now, Americans don't know this because we've got Mr. Marlboro Man who advertises over and over again, I don't need anyone. That's what makes me strong. That's what makes me mysterious. That's what makes me cool. That's what makes me better than all those people who who have feelings, who are interdependent, who know each other. You know, this whole chauvinism which is what it is. It's I, the masculine individual, is much better than you, the group, the cohesive community. The feminine. The feminine is about the circle and the community. The masculine is about the point and the individual. And we're talking men and women, meaning we've got highly chauvinistic women who couldn't stand to be caught dead, needing someone, feeling, owning how much they depend on other human beings, and who is aloof and enjoys feeling superior to other people who need her. You have the chauvinistic men who feel superior to a woman that needs him because he doesn't need her. He's just using her for sex. And if she was as mature and sophisticated and independent as him, well, she wouldn't need him either. So he's better than her because he doesn't need her. She needs him. We have this ignorance. It's an ignorance because biologically, when you do tests, whether you're dealing with a test of a chauvinist or a test of someone with an avoidant trauma and attachment protocol, or whether you're dealing with someone who's highly community-minded, highly trustworthy, highly trusting, and deeply interconnected, the biology of mammals was designed to create more sense of well-being, safety, and more synergy in secure, attached community formations, and to stress and decrease the likelihood of success in isolated people who will not trust and be trustworthy for a secure attachment, and will aspire to the kind of isolation and independence of need that actually sets them up for failure when one of these waves, be it from nature or from other human beings, comes their way and they cannot deal with an 80-volt charge alone. So this is just a little bit of the tension between science and culture. Scientists, in the practice of their craft, are not chauvinistic. Scientists, in the practice of their culture, are often some of the most chauvinistic. And the lack of distinction between the cultural bias that says that if you can speak effectively in public, you are better than someone who can listen effectively in public and really digest and take in and learn and integrate what was learned. Now, the scientist says the person listening is smarter because they learned something and the speaker didn't learn as much. The listener didn't have to spend as much energy preparing and comes away with more value if they know how to listen. Well, listening is a feminine trait. To receive is a feminine trait. To receive is a profound strength and a survival advantage. So this is science. But then you have culture saying to receive is weak, to need is weak. I don't want to listen to what someone else has to say. I want to speak. You see, this is not scientific. The data doesn't back it up as being more conducive to well-being per energy invested than, in many cases, the feminine. And ultimately, they're equal. Ultimately, you try and have a speaker with no listening, waste of time. You try and have a listener with no speaking, waste of time. So we have all these different distinctions. But regardless of the cultural environment, regardless of where and why the shame originates, shame, the feeling of exposure, that, you know, the naked person who's had their clothes ripped off in a crowded room where everyone else is clothed. There's a sense of imbalance, an imbalance of exposure. And this imbalance of exposure is a source of shame. It's flooding these emotional centers. We do need other people to survive. This is a scientific fact, meaning we are significantly more resilient as a species and as communities and as individuals in an interconnected partnering synergy, collaborating to meet Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As a result, when we find ourselves at odds, we will feel shame, which is a phenomena of profound imbalance and exclusion, a phenomena of exposure to something that is not honored. Now, children feel this when they have enormous needs and they are not met, and they're humiliated and bullied for having needs, because a child cannot meet the need in any other way. And so what happens is we freeze at these points. Now, if we look at a map within the human heart, every area within the heart that freezes, for example, age 2 around hate freezes. Well, one of the interesting things that happens is in the way the heart is designed, in the way, if you can imagine like a guitar, and you freeze the sound at one point on the string, you can't play that sound, it's frozen. you also reduce the sound significantly in other parts of the string, meaning it's either a very loud vibrating string that's freely vibrating, or it's a frozen string that is much more tit tit as opposed to a full sound. Now our heart works that way in the sense that it's difficult to feel enormous full expressions of love and not feel any hate in a hateful environment. What's a hateful environment? Well, a hateful environment is when the human heart is subjected to terror, overload, betrayal, meaning someone that could help them isn't, and helplessness, meaning they don't know where to go. So it's a bad neighborhood, it's 1 a.m, you don't want to have sex with someone, they say, get out, I never want to see you again. It's like, yeah, fine, but it's 1 a.m, there's no cabs, I don't have a phone, and I say, get out, I don't want to see you again. So there's terror, there's overload, I can't respond to this situation in this time frame. There's betrayal, you could let me stay here in the morning rather than punishing me for not having sex with you, but you're not. And there's helplessness, I don't have another place to turn for help. You see, I don't have a phone. He won't let me use my phone. So now you have equals hate. When you sit with this and the energy continues and you realize that the other person is not going to respond, that they want to hurt you, and you don't have another choice, you will feel hatred. Now, you will not feel hatred at all. You will feel pity for them. See, watch what happens. So there you are. It's 1 a.m, terrible neighborhood. You've been raped before. You're forced out. You don't have the physical strength. You don't have competency with your body. You don't know any martial arts, etc. You don't have a phone. And you see the intensity of hatred, the intensity of anger that's coming at you. Well, this is what I talked about. This is a guy. Guys have got fragile egos around this. Who knows exactly what's turning them into fight, flight, the fight mode, because this is a fight if it's an authentic instinct. The sexual rejection is being experienced as a trauma. This can happen. It's being experienced as a life and death thing. Maybe it's 3 women have rejected this guy over the last month, and he feels unlovable, inadequate, like he's unwanted. He feels shame because he's desperately wanted to have sex with these 3 different women, and every one of them has, he's done all the different things he knows how to do. He's feeling helpless. He's feeling hostile. He's feeling like, I don't know what else to do. I'm sick of this. And he feels betrayed. What the fuck do I have to do? Was the food wrong? Do you not like me? Then why do you come on the date? What on earth do I have to do? There's a sense of it's too much. There may be the fear of loneliness, the fear of isolation, the fear of frustration, the fear of, just a surge of anger, etc., and this feeling of helplessness. I don't know what to do to get this gal, or any gal for that matter, to want to have sex, to want to spend time together, to want to prioritize this, whatever it is. So you have hate, which is often a contagious, like through mirror neurons. Gary Slutkin's doing great work on violence to show the correlation between violence as a contagious disease. That violence follows the laws of a contagious epidemic. In the way it spreads, in the way that it is healed and treated, and one of the reasons we have large pockets of escalating violence is that we don't treat violence like a disease. We treat it on a moral level and divide victims and perpetrators, and we escalate violence, meaning we violate the perpetrators. So even the police are part of the contagious disease, and so if hate is spreading, in this case from our archetypal frustrated male to our archetypal scared and trying to honor boundaries feminine, she will feel hate. But let's look at what we do in the equation. Let's take just helplessness. We've got the betrayal, the fear, the overload, the disappointment, got all that. But let's just delete this helplessness and watch what happens to hate. So in order to delete helplessness, we've got to replace scarcity with abundance. So helplessness is created by scarcity. So in this case, she has no phone. And there's no taxi. And she has no friend in the neighborhood. So let's replace scarcity for her, where all she has to do is press a panic button, bing, on her wrist, bing. She's got 200 friends in the area that are part of her panic trauma network, right? So they all get an alert. They know her GPS location. They know and have agreed on what the protocol means. And within 30 seconds, one of them has said they will be there. And she gets a little text, we'll be there in 5 minutes. And there's no fear. There's no helplessness. Now the hate morphs into boredom, disgust, pity. Gee, the poor guy, he's so frustrated. I would have liked to have sex with him, but that he wore these perfume that I can't stand, and he was touchy when I tried to tell him to remove it, and this and that, and it's just not how I want to spend my evening. But wish him well, because I'm safe. You see, I'm safe. I have options for well-being. Bing, the hate disappears. Respect or a disrespect, meaning like I don't respect someone who would send someone out into the cold without knowing that they had a backup plan. I don't respect that. Well, and I don't like that, and I'm not going to see this person, but there's no hate. See, hate requires powerlessness. And in my experience with therapeutic abuse, it was a multi-layered sense of powerlessness that is quite unusual for me, meaning I've been pretty resourceful in anticipating possible threats in a fairly sociopathic culture and preempting them, but about 30 different efforts to preempt the threat didn't work. And then more than 10 efforts to deal with the threat as it was emerging didn't work. You see, because my therapist wasn't interested in resolving anything that would include him owning his own shadow. And then when I asked for help from his buddies, they weren't interested in owning this. And so the sense of terror, loneliness, betrayal, etc. escalated, and the feeling of helplessness as they were not interested in any of this coming to light and taking the steps necessary to protect other people from the same fate. And this feeling of helplessness to teach, helplessness to protect other people, helplessness to stop my own health deteriorating, helplessness to process something that was 80 volts when I would dissociate and go numb, when I would get near it, led again and again to hate. Now, hate has a very strong intensity, but it is in this terrain of frozenness, meaning when you are in a state of hate, things are locked down. It's hot, but it's locked down. It's not flowing. It can't flow until the helplessness turns to a sense of abundance. So the little button, and this is where community, because in email, the equivalent of a button is, hey, I'm being traumatized. I need help. Who's there? What, no one? Hey, I'm being traumatized. I need help. Who's there? No one? I need help, traumatized. Because I was so angry at my therapist. There was the first therapist that I tried was scared of me, you see. He wasn't, very good at holding a boundary. So he violated a couple of requests, and of course I've had it, with paying for therapists to fix other therapists, to fix parental abuse, and having to pay taxes on the whole thing because I live in a cult where we don't deal with this kind of thing, with this kind of stuff preemptively. We don't give parents even a 30-cent email saying, here are all the best books on parenting. Here's the basic skills. Here's what to expect. This is the thing. Are you sure you're up for it? And what do you want to consider? So her hate disappears with the trauma button. Her hate also would disappear with teleportation. You notice that? If all she has to do is think and she's exactly where she wants to be, no problem. If there's any emotional dependency that she doesn't know how to place, because when we have certain levels of fear that we can't carry alone, we depend on someone to share the load in a certain sense, empathically. And studies show that our health goes up when we're in a stressful situation and we have a partner that we trust who is in a secure relationship, who is there by our side. Stress almost entirely vanishes. We'll get through this together. Vanishes that stress. Now, the same is true with him, meaning if all he had to do was snap a finger or wait one night and she would be gone and no big deal, and there were 50 women that would be waiting outside his door in the morning in sexy negligees, waiting to praise him, waiting to spend time with him, waiting to give him a blowjob if that was his first preference, and he could pick a twosome, a threesome, or whatever, he would be smiling. He'd be delighted. It's like, good, I'm glad you're going. You're no fun. And don't, or he would be like, hey, I've got all the sex in the world anytime I want. So you're afraid, you don't want to rush? Don't worry about it. What do you want to talk about? What's a good pace for you? I'm here for you because I have abundance. I have confidence in my ability to create and replace this, and this. And so there's no hate. Okay, you get a bad date every once in a while. It's good to try something new. It's nice to have a challenge. But tomorrow morning, I've got everything I want. I've got a sense of inclusion. I've got a sense of being attractive. I've got a sense of love and belonging. I've got sexual pleasure. I can procreate if that's what's important to me. Done. You just do whatever you want to do. So this is emotion 101. When I say we're in an emotionally illiterate culture. I'm 43 years old, and no one has ever come to me in kindergarten, middle school, high school, college, business school, life, this lover, that lover, or this lover, or this lover, or this lover, or this lover. None of them have ever come to me and said, do you feel any hate? Oh, you feel some hate. Well, what's the powerlessness? Well, I'm feeling 2% hate about this and somewhat powerless about this. Oh, okay, well, let's create some power together. Let's create power for you together so that we can both be free and independent. You see, nobody's ever come to me. And so I had to figure out, why am I feeling hate for one of the first times in my life when it's not like I aspire to feel hatred towards this therapist or this group of people. But what's unusual? And it was the terror and the helplessness from the unknown. New body sensations, new heart sensations, huge impacts emotionally, mentally, biologically, and financially. Just this cascade of a tenfold decrease in well-being all across the board. 1. 2, my support getting knocked off. 3, having the influence of him and his buddies and his emotional needs, their insecurities, their fears flooding into my body when I need help getting it out. And then the betrayal. We're not going to tell anyone. We're not going to hire a trauma specialist. We're not going to help you. You've paid to be abused, and you're just going to have to live with that because we're not going to own it. You keep taking our fear as opposed to let us own your panic, fear, etc. And as the money started to dry up, I went through 80,000 in savings, and it's like, we're just a few months in. I don't know when the end is this. I don't know where this is going. And then this is wrong. This is not how therapists are supposed to behave. And then hate crystallizing. And, it's like, what's this doing in my body? And what do I do with it? Well, what we do with it is we work to get help. We work to get help, to give back the helplessness. That's one variable. And then the terror, one of the terrors being loneliness, remedying that, understanding that, and forming new secure attachments outside of the circle of betrayal. So then new sense of belonging. And then having to get into good enough physical health to start making money again. So there's not helplessness around money, learning what was hurting my body and what wasn't, and finding that I could stay on a stable track of slowly recovering my body, my adrenals, etc. And then, gaining more of a sense of power. because when you're in this isolated state, you know, like let's look at you know, when someone is in power and sexually abuses someone who's in an isolated place, you know, it's a very one-sided thing, particularly if the need is one way. Now, because that's actually another issue, you know, with the therapist is I have a strong attached pattern of relating. He has an avoidant pattern. So he has more of a flight pattern away from communication and intimacy when there's conflict. Whereas I have a, hey, let's get together quickly and immediately and let's sort this out. Well, of course, getting together quickly, immediately and sorting this out works better scientifically if you want to salvage the relationship. But different people have different strategies. His strategy, of course, was you know, have many backup relationships, you know, a very wide social pool, and always to run away and withdraw, to use that leverage of withholding. And so, you know, so in that pattern, it gets frozen into this high voltage state, and I'm left there because nobody's dealing with it. Now, one of the things that I find most interesting about all of this is another pattern of weight, where I want to see this as a, because this is another metaphor, but it's an important one. I want you to see this as a pound. Now, if 2,000 people give you a pound, so 1 elb, 1 pound times 2,000, and put this on top of you, you cannot move. You are frozen by the fact, it's another version of the voltage analogy, you're frozen by the fact you feel this enormous pressure on you, and your muscles haven't, because it's happened suddenly, number one, and because it's out of proportion, meaning you've got 2,000 people all depending on you. You look at some of the phenomena where occasionally stockbrokers or hedge fund managers, etc., will commit suicide. And what they're feeling is, oh my God, I've got 100 clients and they all trust me and I love making them happy. And they're all going to feel absolutely devastated and blame me because I lost all their money. All of them. I can't deal with that. I can't deal with that. It's too much. So one of the greatest associations of all, to just check out, to run off, to lie, to start covering it up so I don't have to face it, or to kill myself. And it's, again, that feeling of I can't face all of that feeling, all that energy. I can't go into this area. Now, one of the things that happens with PTSD and with complexes is that there are certain areas of the heart, let's just say there's 40% of this whole instrument, that that contains unresolved reservoirs of emotion. These are reservoirs of emotion that are massive because they've been adding up. Like every time something comes up and I don't want to deal with it, I dissociate. We wonder how people can be so numb in our modern world. We get overloaded and we dissociate, and we create more and more boundaries that say, that's not me, that's not me, that's not my problem. All I care about, all I'm going to think about, all I can bother to feel about is this one narrow area. Now, this is actually a coping strategy. It's called narrow beam focus, tunnel vision. It correlates with addiction, repetitive thoughts, focus, and behavior. Addiction, narrow band, pleasurable or rewarded, repeat behavior. Now, the key thing with the coping strategy is that it has a narrow focus. All I have to do is get to the office. All I have to do is get to the office and get through the day, and then get to the office and then get through this list and I can't deal with my son's drug problem. I can't deal with the fact that my wife blames me. I can't deal with the fact that I feel sexually frustrated and every time I bring it up, I get an explosion. I can't deal with the explosion. I can't deal with the fact that I'm not sleeping well. But I can get to work. I can take a cigarette. I can have a drink. I can shoot up with cocaine or opium or whatever it is that puts me into a fixated state of some kind. Psychedelics, by contrast, tend to break addiction because they force you into a wider field of awareness that is outside of the narrow beam focus. And the purpose of a narrow beam focus is pain avoidance, because you've got pain over here and you got pain over here, but in this little band where you focus obsessively, there's no pain. Now, this is a survival strategy, Viktor Frankl focused on the day and finding meaning, etc., in a German concentration camp. Some prisoners look out the window and look at the little bird. Some people in desperate loneliness, make friends with a rabbit or, whatever it is. It's a coping strategy when we're overwhelmed psychologically with so much pain in our environment that we have to tune it out, dissociate from it, and focus on the one thing that's positive. And this obsession on the positive is actually a symptom of enormous pain. Because when the reality really is healthy and positive, you don't have to remind people to focus on the positive. But when people are in a lot of pain, and there's good stuff and bad stuff, one of the coping strategies is everyone, particularly in an upper, some people focus on the negative and the complaints and feel better that way, and some people that just can't deal with that amount of pain focus on the upper, like be positive. Look, I don't want to hear about your wife's cancer. Look at the nice little bird over there. I don't want to hear about the fact that you hate your job and can't stand it, but don't know what to do to leave it. You hate it because you're powerless, meaning you're terrified that you can't find another job easily to replace it. So you don't like it, but you feel powerless to do something about it. So you hate it. If you could just snap your finger and tomorrow be working in your ideal company, you wouldn't hate it. You'd just work in your ideal company and feel great. So this is kind of a cultural management strategy. But what I want to say is that when you have 2,000 pounds of pressure coming down from an individual, now, and this pressure does not have to be consciously directed by the 2,000 people. Meaning if an individual hears in the course of their life 2,000 people, one in this movie, 5 in that movie, 2 news commentators, their wife on 300 occasions, their wife's sister on 5 occasions, the wife's father-in-law on 6 occasions, your child on 20 occasions, the magazine on 800 occasions, that you are fat, number one, and that you're undesirable as a fat person, and it's your fault. So you've heard that 2,000 times, and each time is a single time, about a pound of impact. But time has gone on. It's been a decade or so now, and you've heard that message 2,000, 20,000 times. It's just too, how do I get all that back off and say I love my body and really feel what it feels like to be in my body? I love my... Because how many times, this is where you have the imbalance of scale, how many times do you need to say that for you to compensate for the 2,000 times that you've gotten the message that you're bad? How many times do I have to say that my feelings really do matter, that the impact had on me by my therapist does matter? How many times do I have to say that to balance the fact of being raised in a culture where my feelings have never mattered in any meaningful way? Never. 300 million votes not to have a census on emotions. Not a single hour of emotional literacy because your feelings matter. So we're going to teach you about feelings in high school. Your feelings matter, so your parents are actually going to listen to how you feel and why you feel that way rather than tell you what you should feel so that it makes them feel better. In other words, their feelings matter, not yours. The teacher's feelings matter, not yours. The bully's feelings matter, not yours. The business person who wants to do business but doesn't really want to hear how you're doing. They want to say how you're doing, and they want you to say fine, and then they want to sign the check and go. Their feelings of wanting to get out of there should matter, but not yours. Not your feelings. And there is no point in the year where you get a 20-hour download of all the feelings that just keep building up and building up and building up. So how do I feel like my feelings matter when I have my therapists, my community leaders, my community giving me the message that they don't matter? Not enough to take time, not enough to take money, not enough to risk their reputation, not enough to worry about my health and what I need. They matter enough to be managed somewhat. This isn't our issue and all that. So how many times do I need to say, no, they matter, no, they matter, no, they matter, no, they matter, no, they still matter, before it begins to heal 2,000 messages on this issue alone that your feelings do not matter? Well, a lot. It's taken 800 hours of video. It's taken 2,000 pages. It's taken talking with this person and talking with that person and spending lots of time talking about it with my partner to get the message, oh, my feelings don't matter to these people enough to do X, Y, and Z. But they do matter enough for me to do X, Y, and Z. And one person has to say that. There's a battle, basically, with our environment. Take the thing with fat. if you're getting 2,000 messages a year that if you're fat, you're unlovable in some way, independently of the issue of healing the fat, which can happen in surgery, can happen in the diary, but gets actually back to what I want to talk about is this constellation, that when you have a heavy weight that is too big for the conscious, spiritual, and human being mind to deal with, it triggers a regression into a younger age where prior trauma happened, number one. That happened a lot. And then number two, it triggers a dissociation, which creates a certain level of numbness and a certain level of loneliness, because your heart is no longer with you. It's offline in the short circuit of the overload. And finally, to overcome that message and get down to size, you've got to remind yourself more than 2,000 times that you're lovable even if you're fat, because the brain emphasizes the negative more than the positive by a factor of 400 to 500%, according to John Gottman, which is why you've got to communicate 500% more praise and positivity to a partner than you do critical feedback for the relationship to feel good to the other person and be sustainable to both of you, because the critical comments will hit home and go deep as part of the brain's trauma response and coping mechanism to pay attention to threats. And the praise will often bounce off. So you have to send 500% more praise than criticism for it just to break even, for it to be equal, and leaning towards positive. Now, what I want to deal with is this psychological phenomena of 2,000 pounds of weight sitting on an individual that's been added way faster than they have a chance to diffuse it. Because it's like a big truck coming and dumping 2,000 pounds of weight, and then you're there with your shovel, shoveling it off. And the question is, how many hours or how many years or how many months is it going to take you working full time at that pile before you get the amount of weight that's been pushed onto your field, into your psyche, into your energy body, into your emotional self, off and processed so that it's not crushing you. Because if the 2,000 pounds is on you right away, you can't move. And this is the crisis. Because when 2,000 pounds are on you and you're laying down, you can't get up to get the shovel to start laying the pieces off. And this is one of those things of helplessness, where you're laying here, you got 2,000 pounds, and you can't move. You can't go to work because you're in a state of dissociative paralysis and panic. That means you can't focus on making the customer happy. So there's a helplessness around money. Now you can't go to the doctor because Western medicine doesn't integrate heart and physiology in an intelligent way. And so going to the hospital is going to create several problems. New trauma with the dissociative doctor. My doctor shouts at me as if I'm 20 feet away when I'm right in front of her. Number one. Number two, with the helplessness around money, she rattles off tests at a rate of thousands of dollars an hour. You start coming in and doing some of the, like I did one of her MRI tests, $1,500, and then another one, another $1,500. She rattled that off in one sentence, and with no basis, meaning might be this, I can't talk about it now, I've only got 15 minutes to talk to you, go spend $3,000. That can only happen so many times before you realize that the doctor, particularly when you've got helplessness around money, is a bigger threat because they make you feel bad. It's stressful to go out of the house with all this going on. And they don't understand the emotional component. They absolutely don't want to understand the emotional component. And you're absolutely certain they're going to waste money. Is any of it going to help? Are they just going to throw out a antidepressant or something, which again freezes the thing? It doesn't resolve the issue. No Vietnam veteran has ever solved long-term issues as a result of pharmaceutical drugs. It's just frozen it and allowed a coping mechanism and a dependency on the substance, much like any addiction. Now, then you look at relationships. Well, when you're reduced into a state of terror and hate and distrust by betrayal, how do you navigate the avoidant landscape of the United States? Because the United States has as its pinnacle the independent, sociopathic, doesn't need anyone, clever, shrewd, sophisticated person that comes out on top and has a lot of money and looks good and has lots of sex but stays unattached and doesn't need anyone and just has a good time and doesn't, the absence of femininity is basically the ideal. And so how do you deal with a whole country that's been raised with that avoidant pattern in attachment? It's an avoidant attachment pattern based out of trauma and fear, and find someone that's going to honor the deep need and the deep emotional vulnerability when the culture is predisposed with the chauvinism towards the feminine, even more so in men than women, to attack any need. So immediately you express emotional need, you immediately lose social status in the United States of chauvinism towards the feminine in men, which of course extends to the feminine in women as well. A little bit less so, but it's a hostility towards the feminine in men and women, including emotions, what we call too emotional, but it's really too avoidant. Emotions are what they are. If the strings of the heart are plucked loudly, they ring loudly. If you say it's too loud, well, stop plucking those chords. If you don't want to hear me cry, then don't bash me over the head. Don't bash me over the head and then tell me the crying is too loud. Stop bashing me over the head. Thank you. It's corollary. Now, so you've got helplessness here, and I actually did venture out on Craigslist. My therapist had disabled my email account, so I couldn't ask for help in the community. They didn't want me to have access to telling the story, you see. And so there's helplessness around that. I thought it might be safer to just have male cuddle buddies or something. Well, that's a very dicey, highly uncertain, and in some ways terrifying prospect in the general public of the United States. So there was helplessness, in that social area. And then there's emotional helplessness, because I do best with secure attachments and I'm being actively betrayed by everyone who has agendas other than showing up for what I need. So I'm actually disabled. And I would turn to a partner, but she just betrayed me, and so we just separated. So I have no one. And I would, of course, turn to men, but in my experience in community trying to deal with men, inviting 40 men to be meaningfully intimate friends, I found that 40 men could not return phone calls. So when you're exhausted, and because that's another state with adrenal fatigue is exhaustion, is you have to manage energy. Now, when you tried making friends with 40 men in a meaningful way and none of them can return calls, that the reason I separated from them was the energy drain. It takes too much energy to always make the calls, one. Two, to always have to listen to the excuses. Oh, I was just about to call you. I ended up losing those friends for good when I decided to test the hypothesis that they were just about to call me, which they had all been saying for several years, but never did, when I never called them a single man again for 4 years. And all of the men who were just about to call me never called. So when you've got a drain of that amount of avoidant waste, it's, first of all, all these disappointments add up. So they themselves become a big object, because with this avoidant betrayal pattern over and over and over and over again, it's too much to grieve the lacks of integrity, to grieve the lost opportunity, to grieve the sadness that in addition to 40 men not calling and showing up, the sadness that they are not coming to me and saying, let's connect and make this be meaningful. That there's no person showing up, which again creates the helplessness. Because how can you deal with, when you've got a 2-pound weight and you're in a panic, do you want to call an avoidant man or woman who isn't going to show up because they don't want to deal with it? They feel safer avoiding the issue, which is kind of what they do with their own stuff, with their own addictions, or this, that, and the other. So this is an environment that many Americans find themselves in to one degree or another, including all of these avoidant men and women who don't show up for relating, etc., in a meaningful way. So there's less of a sense of someone really safe and healthy to call for an important issue, if they're even connected with themselves enough to track those issues. In this kind of situation, what is needed when one is laying flat like this is actually a circle. You need a circle because it's too much for just one person to deal with. One person carried 30% of it or 20% of it for me for a couple of months by showing up 3 hours twice a week, which was the container, the agreement. And they broke the container when they broke the agreements around timing on 3 occasions. And it's not solid. When you're in a crisis, you can't deal with flaky people because the trauma-centered brain escalates uncertainty into its own threat. So it's actually feels safer to be stable in this kind of paralysis than it does to be needing and reaching out and being rejected. That was a very interesting experience for me, to notice that the absence of stability made the help useless, worse than useless. Meaning a volatile, unreliable partner when you're in crisis is worse than none, because of the way it fucks with the sense of certainty and confidence, and also the message of value. Because when a flaky support person understands the pain you're in and how much you need the help, number one, and number two, and thirdly is flaky, doesn't keep agreements, doesn't show up, they are adding to the weight that says your feelings do not matter to me. And when that is the weight, and they're now adding to it by being flaky, because someone that puts your needs as their number one priority can easily do it. I mean, it just doesn't take a rocket to show up 3 hours at a time, twice a week. It's just drive over there. But she wanted to go and harass her family, and deal with this and that and the other, when that never works out. But that's, she wanted to go do that, and then, of course, not tell me. And then she had a date that she wanted to go on that date and not communicate and not extricate the boundary, not renegotiate, just, and you can't deal with. I'm less important than my fixation with the past. I'm less important than this date. You need someone when you're in a medical crisis that actually puts you first. So that was, that's the end of that relationship. Because when I experience physiologically that it feels worse to be helped in that way than no help at all, it's not help. The biggest threat at this time is adrenal collapse and a sense of emotional dignity. These are two very sensitive things for American men in chauvinistic countries, or in the chauvinism that is America. The chauvinism that says we'll send you to high school and spend 10,000 hours teaching you all kinds of stuff you're never going to use in your life, including algebra, but we're not going to spend a single hour helping you feel dignified in respecting your own feelings. In fact, we are going to shame you. The more feelings you have as a man, the more you will be humiliated at home and at school. And when you load that onto the male psyche and then add in, sexual abuse, therapeutic abuse, parental abuse, and nobody's talking about it in a shadow-phobic country, it's an absolute recipe for extreme disaster and helplessness. So that leads to hate. Now, what I want to talk about is a technology of circling where the weights that have been funneled onto an individual, the weight of a relatively speaking 30-foot giant of a parent next to a 2-year-old infant, the weight of that hostility, the weight of that helplessness as the first waves of trauma and PTSD are passed on to the infant, that is way too big to hold. It's too big for most therapists, or it would be coming up. You see, I've done $150,000 of therapy, and these big things never surface in the therapy session because the container isn't strong enough for one person to hold it in 50 minutes. It's kind of like, would anyone be dumb enough to build the Titanic in a 50-minute session for $100? You don't begin that project unless you've got necessary resources and time and priority with skilled people. Now, the technology of circling, you get a sense of the weight emotionally, financially, physically, mentally, socially, etc. The different weights that have been put on you. How high is the shame here? How much is the loneliness here? How much is the grief here? This is just a small aside, is I'm 43 years old and I've never wept in my entire life. And I've been in constant pain. Now, this may not seem unusual. It's quite possibly a statistically large percentage of the American male population. But it is astounding in anthropological context. Meaning, other than Western men in European and American puritanical, emotionally repressive, chauvinistic cultures in the last 1,000 years, other than that segment of what is considered the most upper class, which is always the most left brain, non-emotional, more mathematical, lineal, and that part of the population in Western cultures has always denigrated emotion and the feminine. And it has denigrated women for being more feminine than the men who refuse to feel. Now, this has been looked at deeply by Alice Miller, and also there's a great book on psychohistory and how it correlates with wars. You know, the history of war and the founders that have initiated those wars with the support of populations, including Hitler, including Mr. Bush, Mr. Trump. There is a strong connection between the experience of the child in its relationship with trauma with both parents and what kind of a leader that child makes, number one, and whether that child would be the slightest bit interested in rising in leadership. Most healthy, secure individuals understand when they look at something like a presidency that this is a torture cell for many human beings. I mean, spending 18-hour days being criticized by large segments of the population and being judged for a lot of things out of your control is a feeling of helplessness. It's not easy to be a president. It's not easy emotionally. It's not easy mentally. It's not very rewarding financially, other than all the bribery and scandals and stuff around it. So it's difficult. But once you have this sense of the weight, you then have to have a sense of how big the circle needs to be. There are some griefs and some pains that need 100 people to hold the pain in the circle. They need the weight, and they need empathy, which is very difficult to come by when people are dissociated. You need empathy. In most of the world, through most of history, tribes have processed and spent about a third of their energy processing emotions. Women in women's circle, men with the men, a lot of small level intimacy, usually groups of 150 or less, in tribal cultures, and with dancing, with drumming, with grieving rituals. There has been a deep honoring and a releasing where the deep grief of an individual is held by the entire tribe, which is necessary for the individual to process and release a massive 2,000 weight in an efficient manner and come back to full productivity. Because when you have 100 people wailing and dancing and drumming around you, who absolutely own and understand, number one, what's going on. Number two, that your grief is our grief. Number three, that we stand together and you belong. Number four, there's nothing wrong with you. And number five, we're here for you, to dance, to wail, to hold, to give, to scream, to go unconscious, to beat your fists, to wail. And we will be with you until you are done. If we need to dance and drum for 3 days, and that's what we do for the health of this tribe, the health of the community, because we are singing ourselves back to health. It took the Western mind to destroy that resource from each one of us. Because you and I have never danced in a circle of 100 men, wailing our tears, hearing our grief, being known and knowing that we share this together, and that there is no shame in emotion, in femininity, that there is a great dignity, and we feel the energy and the vitality coming back into the tribe in the process. Now the question is the dissociated Western mind capable of understanding the value? Francis Weller is finding that there is a responsiveness, that the snobbery and chauvinism of the Western mind has a breaking point in grief, and that the rituals that he holds of grieving and sharing, they're not the same. We're not coming close to the quality, the emotional quality of a tribe 1,000 years ago or today in the Amazon, with people that have grown up together in a small group, who've never been shamed and bullied for being emotional, who've never conceived of the stupidity of separating some emotions and not others, that understand the wheel of energy, heart, mind, and body, heart, mind, and body, heart, mind, and body, and that if you pollute the waters and pollute the fish, you eat poison. If you pollute the heart, you pollute the mind, you pollute the body. Now, here's a very important thing to understand with these 2,000 L weights. They're biological. Every single feeling and thought that we have is stored in memories, in beliefs, in attitudes, in the body. These are not just miscellaneous things floating around that have no connection with our health. Our health suffers when we fail to address these issues. It's a killer. Whether it's the leading heart in American disease, heart disease, being correlated with the dismemberment of certain close-knit communities, which when the rare sociologist gets to do a study on that, you get to see how when the community fragments, heart disease goes up. This is a health issue. And we need to reinvent the art of caring for our community in a real way, not just some word, a nice platitude for a newsletter or marketing spiel. But there needs to be people that we check in with every day in a meaningful way with. And there need to be people that we check in with every week in a meaningful way with. And there need to be people that we check in with every month in a meaningful way with, that are our buddy, our partner, our family, our community. And we need to know the organs of a community, because in the egotism of chauvinism, where all we are is the individual, and this, rather than seeing this as a profound loss, it's kind of as if the hand cut itself off from the rest of the body and is so proud that it's a hand. Sure, it's a hand, but can you move like this? No, it's flapping around on the table. Can it grasp something and move it here? No, it doesn't have the body weight. An isolated hand is not some great accomplishment. It is a diminishment of the synergy that is possible in an effective group. Now, in the ignorance of our culture, there are plenty of groups that waste more energy and more time than individuals do. They get together and have meetings. Where's the dance? Where's the grieving? Where's the ritual that potentizes the group? Missing. You just have different people talking and nobody listening in a chauvinistic culture that values the speaker more than the listener. So we need a circling for these types of issues, and the circling has a principle that every person shows up and carries a certain amount of the weight. Now, once the weight can be lifted off the person who's buried under it, they can get up and help to move the weight. When you have certain weights directed on an individual and there's not enough help coming in, it just stays there and incapacitates the individual. Now, when we understand that we are a tribe, an incapacitated individual weakens the tribe. They're not pulling their weight because they've got too much weight stuck on them. It's paralyzing rather than motivating. And there's a very important point. It may be at the 200-pound point, maybe at the 300-pound point, but before 600 pounds, you don't put a 600-pound weight on a typical body and try and get it to walk around and do its thing. You know, you have to make trips. You have to do bits. You have to break it down into bite-sized pieces, number one. And two, you have to bring in circling to speed up the process. Now, the truth is that much like a barn raising process in a community where everyone comes to help raise the barn, it brings the community together, it makes the community alive, it restores flow and energy in a very potent and powerful way. It's way more fun to help someone raise a barn and have them help you raise a barn than to do it on your own and stay isolated. It's way more fun, it's more rapid. If you're just doing one individual, the wood starts rotting while you're hacking away at your own little thing because you don't get to put the roof on in a hurry, as opposed to raise it all up with fresh wood, put on the roof so it doesn't rot, and then go and help someone else. This is the power of synergy. The power of synergy and partnering is so powerful. Now, we do it to make money in a materialistic culture. We do not do it to increase our emotional well-being. We do not partner consciously to heal hate, to heal shame, to transform terror into joy, to lift ambivalence into enthusiasm. These are all partnering activities, and they happen with as much precision and technology as any other activity that we can do scientifically. There is a science to emotion, but in the chauvinism of an unscientific culture, it's unscientific basically to study the physical body that is affected by emotions and not study the emotions that affect the body. That's unscientific. If you want to deal with a system, you don't just look at the finger and not look at the fact that it's connected with the hand. That's dumb. We're dumb as a scientific culture when it comes to emotions. Well, how do you resolve that? Well, you look at it, and then you start studying emotions. You want to be less dumb emotionally? Spend 2 or 3 hours a day learning about rage and how it deteriorates out of jealousy and envy, or learn how to create, this apathy and bring it back to, learn how to heal boredom. You want to know how to heal boredom? You give something. You give something important. If you tell the truth, you won't be bored. Make it an important truth. Talk about the moments you're not attracted to your partner. Talk about the moments you are. Talk about what the things are. Talk about who you're more attracted to than your partner, in which contexts, and why. Talk about your deepest terrors, your deepest feelings. Talk about what you've never showed or shared to anyone, and you will not be bored. Give something important, you will not be bored. If someone is bored with you, they're not giving anything. Wake up, wake up. I don't want to be around a boring person. Give something meaningful. If you're not willing to put out, get out of here. Go be bored somewhere else. There's no time for boredom. Give something meaningful. Ask for something meaningful. Both people are excited suddenly. Both people are on tip. Oh, is this going to work? I don't know. It's very interesting. It's a risk. So, in summary, the individual, like anything, has its own energy field and its own boundaries and limits that must be honored. When they are not honored, it creates dissociation, it creates trauma, it creates fight, flight, freeze strategies that may seem irrational. But if you understand that if someone is in fight, flight, or freeze, it means one thing. Number one, they're in trauma, and number two, nobody's helping them with it. That's all it means. Fight, flight, freeze. You're in trauma, and no one's helping you. Because if you're being helped, you're not in trauma anymore. As soon as you are no longer in danger, and you know it, the reptilian brain quiets. In the mammalian and the human brain, the blood starts coming up, and you start remembering that you're a human being. You start having empathy, and you stop the fight, flight, freeze dynamic. You stop the fight, flight, freeze dynamic, and you stop the fight, flight, freeze dynamic, and you start feeling like you belong and are safe. As soon as you feel you belong and are safe, you start partnering with other people on a conscious level. No more need for fight, flight, freeze. So you see someone in fight, flight, freeze, no one's helping them. Do you want to try? Do you want to learn about trauma? Read Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. What this is a big pitch for community at a scientific level that is effective based on felt experience, based on biology, based on results in the community. And I thank you for the quality of your attention and for exploring these ideas.